Hi, my name is Hope Unger.
My name is Cailyn Wall.
My name is Payten Soames.
I'm Hunter Bledsoe.
I'm Shelby Sola, and we are doing our project on depictions of COVID-19 in the media.
Previous studies have shown that after watching an intense video on terrorism, participants' anxiety towards terrorism increases. This study aimed to determine the effects of COVID-19 in the media and how that may impact students' anxiety. We hypothesized that anxiety would increase after watching a news clip from an opposing politically affiliated news source. Participants were asked to complete the COVID anxiety scale and the state trait inventory before answering whether they typically leaned left or right politically. This information was only used to get an equal number of right and left-leaning individuals in each group. Participants were randomly selected to watch a congruent political media clip or an incongruent political media clip. Clips were from either Fox News or MSNBC. After the news coverage, participants again completed the COVID anxiety scale and the state trait anxiety inventory. The scales from before and after the video were compared for each participant. We found significant differences in anxiety for both the COVID anxiety scale and the state trait inventory, but only for those who leaned right politically. Overall, we found that the scores for the COVID anxiety scale went down and the scores for the state trait inventory went up. There was no effective media exposure. The increase in anxiety only for those that leaned right politically may be because those who leaned left were already anxious about the virus, whereas those who leaned right may not have been as concerned prior to the news exposure.
So a little bit of background on why we chose to do this and some research that we found while doing our literature review. We were really interested in something having to do with COVID, and our group really was interested in like the media aspect of it. So we found a bunch of research, and I'll read a couple little snippets from those articles. It's expected that the mental health effects of COVID-19 will have lasting effects even after we return to more normality. Media can have both a positive and negative impact on its consumers, depending on what they are exposed to. Weeks, who was a researcher, suggests that, for example, if a participant is exposed to information about COVID-19 from a news source that tends to oppose their political view, and they experience anxiety from the information presented, then they will be more likely to ignore the fact that the information may go against what their party represents and continue to believe the information that caused anxiety. News clips on terrorism had a significant impact on college students' anxiety who live in war-torn countries. Media coverage of terrorism leads to an increased connection with the events, even if they are in the safety of their own home. The media brings attention to the problem and raises an individual's focus on the threat. So after looking at what the effect that media has on terrorism, we hypothesized that after exposing participants to news clips pertaining to COVID-19, we expect to find an increase in anxiety levels. We predict that based on an individual's political ideology, participants will show an increase in anxiety after watching news clips associated with the opposite political party.
So we had 27 participants who were all students from Carroll College, and they were at least 18 years old. They filled out a COVID anxiety scale, 2 state trait inventories, their political preference, and they were either told to watch an MSNBC news video or a Fox News video. Based on their political standings, participants were told to watch a Fox News broadcast or an MSNBC news broadcast, both covering the topics of COVID-19. So if participants were right-leaning, they watched an MSNBC video, and if they were left-leaning, they watched a Fox News video. The COVID-19 anxiety scale, both the state trait inventories and the political leaning questionnaires were administered before the participants watched the news broadcasts. And after the videos, they were given the COVID anxiety scale and the state trait inventories to complete again. We compared pre-video and post-video scores on the COVID anxiety scale and the 2 state trait inventories to see if media exposure had an effect on anxiety in college students.
So for our results, while looking at the right-leaning individuals, we had 6 individuals who watched the MSNBC video and 6 who were exposed to the Fox video. And the scores on the COVID anxiety scale significantly decreased in individuals that leaned right after watching either video. It didn't matter. There was no significant difference in media exposure in scores on the COVID scale. Right-leaning individuals also had a significant increase in state anxiety following exposure to media. There was no significant difference in state anxiety and media type. Finally, there was no significant difference in state anxiety before or after media exposure, and no significant difference in which type of media exposure for the trait anxiety.
So when it came to our left-leaning participants, we had 6 participants that watched an MSNBC video and 7 participants that ended up watching our Fox video. There was no significant difference in COVID scores following either media video. There was a marginally significant increase in state anxiety following either media exposure. There was no significant difference in trait anxiety following either media exposure for those that leaned left.
So here you can see that for the state anxiety, both the left and the right experienced an increase in their state anxiety. However, we did find that the right-leaning individuals experienced a greater increase. And then for this one, for the trait anxiety, there was no significant difference, which makes sense since the trait is how you overall feel normally. And so you shouldn't see a big difference for that before or after watching a video.
So in conclusion, we found that media exposure on COVID-19 showed no significant difference in anxiety levels between left-leaning and right-leaning individuals. However, both political parties scored higher on the state anxiety questionnaire after watching a video from the opposite party. These results suggest that media exposure had a negative effect on anxiety regardless of political standing. One of the studies that we gathered a lot of our information from showed videos on terrorism as a means of media exposure to examine the levels of anxiety in young adults. The control group for this study was exposed to a non-terrorist video while the experiment group was exposed to a terrorist video and the researchers found that increased anxiety among adults was those who were exposed to the video on terrorism. So negative media exposure had been linked to higher levels of anxiety. Watching a video from the opposite political party on COVID-19 could potentially increase the anxiety college students have about the pandemic. Political media exposure increased the anxiety college students had toward COVID. This suggests that exposing people to a video from the opposite political party of their own during a worldwide pandemic potentially increases their anxiety regarding the virus. Therefore, media exposure poses a threat to the anxiety levels of a college student who wants to get more information on the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks for coming to our presentation.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.